Hey guys, just waiting for people to join. How's everybody doing today?
Doing great.
Awesome. And if you guys are on here, please make sure to turn on your cameras.
Everything's good on
heading
this
home
side.
from a showing. I'll be on video in a sec.
Oh, okay. All right, no problem. So for my team members that are on the call, you may notice there's a whole heck of a lot more people on this call. I open it up to the people that are in my skill bridge program as well. So just in case you see a bunch of names you don't recognize, that's why. And unmute yourselves and tell me, for those of you who are not on my team, what state are you guys in? Because I don't know what state all of you are in.
I'm in California also.
California as well.
Who is not in California?
Myself in Texas.
Charles, you're in Texas. Anybody else not in California?
I'm in Florida.
Who's talking?
Alan.
Okay. Oh, hey, Alan, you're in Florida. Okay, awesome.
Yes, ma'am.
Look at you looking snazzy in a suit.
Thank you.
All right. Who else is not in California? Okay. All right. So the reason why I asked that is because there may be some things we talk about on the call today for those of you who are not in California that may not apply to your state. So just know that as I'm going through the training today, some of these may not apply. So you may have to look up what your local state requirements, restrictions, and rules and regulations are, because I don't know everybody's, and I'm licensed in Florida as well, but I don't know what Florida's actually is. So yeah, so for those of you who are not in California, just make sure that you do that after this call, because I don't want you to think that that's the rule and it may not apply in your state. And also note that here in California, we use escrow companies. If you're in a different state, I don't know what Texas uses, but sometimes other states can use attorneys or title companies. Here, escrow companies work hand in hand with title companies. So if you guys hear me say escrow, just apply it, with attorneys or title or, whoever that is in your state. But if you're in California, at least in Southern California, we use escrow to open up escrow. And I think in Northern California, they may do title. So it may even vary in California because we're such a big state. So, but anyways, so does anybody have questions before I get started on working with buyers or anything?
No.
Who is Zoom user? Who is that? I don't know who that was. Okay, so no questions?
I do have a question, actually.
Okay, go ahead, Ryan Logan. I have another one here, so that's why I said Ryan Logan. Where's your cigar today?
I have it. I just got to go get it. So for me, I was fortunate enough to sign a representation agreement for 3.5%. And I also want to try getting them a home warranty and title insurance, or at least
Mhm.
the home warranty for the first year.
Mhm.
How do you structure that in the offer? Is that part of like seller's concessions? To get like the extra percentage, if we're off like 1% or 0.5%, and then to add in the like those insurance and warranty.
Usually for a 1-year home warranty, that's pretty typical here in California. That's a typical portion of the offer. So everybody's used to seeing that being asked for a 1-year home warranty.
Okay. So how's that look when you're writing up the offer and
Mhm.
you get everything in? Like how's that actually look on the paperwork? Because obviously that agreement is between us, but how do I get the seller side, make sure that they pay that?
Oh, okay. So that is a very good question, actually. So once you're in escrow, so if you're representing the buyer, then you as the buyer's agent are ordering the home warranty for your buyer. And then that's provided, the invoice is provided to escrow, and that's how it gets paid off. So if it's paid by the seller, the escrow company will invoice it to the seller, and then they pay it off, and then the buyer has the 1-year home warranty at the end. But you
Right.
just have to work with your buyer in order to figure out what company they want to use and how much they want to ask for. And how much they want to ask for is going to be based upon, what company they're using, because each company is going to have different pricing.
Right. So we would just structure that in the offer, like
Yeah.
I need the extra
Now, I'll
1%.
show you where, actually, I'm going to share my screen so I can show you where to put that.
Okay. Sorry if that's a terrible question.
No, that is a great question. So over here on the right-hand side is the offer. So I'm going to scroll down to what they call the grid. So you can see my screen, right?
Yep.
Okay. So on the California Residential Purchase Agreement, they have the grid. So this is the grid here. And so if you scroll down all the way to the bottom, I believe, on Q18 is where you will have the home warranty plan. So this is where you check the box for buyer to pay for it, seller to pay for it, both to pay for it. I've never seen that before. Or buyer waives home warranty plan. Some people have waived their home warranty plan to make their offer stronger. And so, like, especially when we were in the market where the interest rates were lower, buyers were doing everything that they could in order to make their offer stronger. So sometimes they would waive that. So then you would put cost over here. So cost not to exceed whatever that cost is going to be. And then here you would select whatever the provider is. You can use Old Republic Home Protection, American Home Shield, Fidelity National Home Warranty. That's a popular one with all of my clients. First American Home Warranty. So there's several different ones that they can choose from just right within here. And of course, if none of those, appeal to them, you can always just type it in as well.
Right.
And then if there's anything additional that they want included, you could just put them in the notes over here.
Got it.
So really what you want to do is, of course, the buyer needs to do their own due diligence as well. But sometimes they don't have time to. And so, you could put over here, issued by, and then just put buyer's choice of company. So that way they can choose after you're in escrow, just in case you don't get accepted. So that's how I've structured it.
And then if I wanted to do the title insurance, I would just put that up under other terms as they would give such and such credit.
So title is already covered up in a different section.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I saw Q9 and I was like, oh.
So the prelim, wait, let me go back up. Oops, I passed it.
I thought I saw it in Q9.
Sorry, I'm still getting used to this grid. Yeah, so typically you ask for the seller to pay for the title's insurance policy. The buyer will pay for the lender's title insurance policy. So that's always the buyer. But for the owner's title insurance policy, that would be seller. And then you would put over here what title company. And usually you just put seller's choice since they're paying for it.
Awesome.
Because they have to provide free and clear title anyways. So they can't sell a property that doesn't have a free and clear title.
Okay.
And that's escrow that's going to take care of that. So. All right, that was a great question. Anything else?
One more for me. I talked too
Okay.
much. For resources, you know, we lean a lot on well, at least myself, I've been leaning a lot on the lender to help me out with resources and to look for different things, different programs for seniors and stuff like that. How would you do that with a cash buyer?
For what? Submitting the offer?
Just if I was curious about where to look for, different programs, I had a couple different questions because the buyers I have, they own they're selling their home. They're going to be cash buyers when they come down this way. And I just really don't have a giant width of information or how would I even give them information on, warranty companies. Do you get what I'm saying? Just an informational packet, where would I be that?
Yeah. So what I do is I have what's called a recommended vendors list. So you just want to come up with your own recommended vendors list, and you could just provide that to them, whenever they start looking for a home. So that way, yeah. So really, ideally, you want to start talking to your clients as you're going around and showing them all these homes, right? Because that's going to be a great way to educate them because, they're going around looking at the home, but, you're talking to them beforehand, you're talking to them afterwards. And then you can also talk to them during and just give them little nuggets of information hey, you can get a 1-year home warranty. I would start looking at different companies online just to see which ones you like. Here's my recommended list of home warranty companies that you may choose to use. So that way they can start looking at those. I always like to provide multiple options just in case, if for whatever reason that home warranty company isn't covering something, they can't blame you. Really, they should be doing their own research on what they want it to cover. Really, we shouldn't be doing all of that research for them. They need to be doing that because that's their due diligence. They're buying this property, right? So they need to make sure that whatever they're wanting is covered under that home warranty. And, usually they can get a home warranty company on the phone and they can ask them all the questions instead of you being the go-between and trying to ask a million questions that they have. So did that answer your question?
Definitely.
Okay. It was a great question. So. All right. Anybody else before I get started? Okay. All right. So I'm going to cover a little bit about working with buyers today. That won't encompass everything because I could probably do an all-day class and still have things to tell you. So let me see. I might have to do a lot of going back and forth. Can you guys see that okay? All right. Awesome. So basically what I'm going to cover today is just going over what to do once your client gets their offer accepted. I'm not going to go over buyer presentations or, qualifying your buyer or anything like that today. I'm going to go over, what happens once you have that buyer in escrow, once they have an accepted offer, and what to do after that, and walking them through that entire transaction. So, it's our responsibility when our client gets accepted to, monitor all of the timelines, the deadlines, and making sure that everything is going as it should, and also making sure that everything is in line with the contract. People can get really strung up on things that are not in the contract. So you want to make sure that whenever you're going over the offer and tracking deadlines, and talking with the other agent that, everything that you're talking about is in the contract. And if it isn't in the contract, then you're going to want it to be. So I'm going to go over all of that with you guys today, and, kind of give you an idea of what you should be doing with your client while you're in escrow. So typically as a buyer's agent, actually, I kind of wanted to give a review. Sorry for those of you who are not in California. I kind of wanted to give a review of the offer first. I know some of my agents have already seen offers, but for those of you who are in California that haven't, it would be a good idea for you guys to go through any contract that you have in any state and just read the entire contract through at least one time, if not more, because every time I read the contract, I figure out something new. And I consistently go to contracts classes. For each one of you on this call, there's contracts classes per state. So in California, the contracts classes are on Wednesdays. I don't know what they are in other states, but EXP has training on contracts classes for each state weekly. So if you're not going to that, I would highly suggest that. In California, they also have a workshop to where on Thursdays, they'll give you a scenario, and then you will write up the contract on that scenario, and then they'll go through it with everybody on that, in that workshop. So I would recommend attending those if you have never done that. I don't know if they have workshops in other states, but it doesn't hurt to look and see if they have one for your state. So for those of you on this call, most of you are new or haven't even gotten your real estate license yet. So they recently changed around the RPA, so the residential purchase agreement. And now they have this thing called a grid. Took me a while to get used to it. First, I didn't like it because I was like, I'm so used to the old one. But with the new one, it's actually pretty clear and concise, because really you don't have to, scroll through like 20 pages. You only have to scroll through the first couple pages. I would kind of go through there and, familiarize yourself with what each spot is saying. And so if you look over here, it gives you a reference point of where on the contract that these items are. So I'd make sure that you go through and and read and see what they mean by all of the terminology, because it's all going to link back to a paragraph. So if you're like, well, what does the initial earnest or the initial deposit amount, what does that mean? You can scroll down and find that. So each one is going to have a reference point, so the way you can go back to it. And then this is going to be where all of the deadlines are. So it's going to say what the purchase price is, how many days to close escrow, expiration of the offer. It typically expires 3 business days after it's after you submit it. Initial deposit amount, what the loan amount is. If it's a VA loan, then it's not going to have any, or it's going to have a full loan amount instead of a lowered one. And then it's going to have an FHA or VA clause along with it. We're not going to go over any of that today. But if you notice in here, it says who pays for what and what company for, if it pertains to a company, such as like the sellers, the title insurance and the escrow company. For loan appraisal and inspection, there's different deadlines for that. Informational access to the property. And this isn't in relation to the inspection. This is just in relation to the buyer being able to access it to like get measurements, or maybe they want to bring in somebody because they want to get new flooring in. So they'll bring somebody in to get a quote for them, what have you. It's not for their inspection though. It's just for their information. And so that's the amount of time that they're allowed to come in to do that. And then there's other deadlines on here for, when the buyer can review seller documents, when seller documents are due, review of lease or liened items, HOA docs, if they're staying in the property afterwards. So anything that, anything you could think of really that's going to be in the contract. And then any personal items or, appliances that are included and excluded. Again, it may be different in your state. In California, you got to check off these items for them to be considered included. So washer, dryer, refrigerator, smart home control devices, potted trees and shrubs. And then of course you can ask for anything additional. And then there are even more boxes for you to check to say who pays for what and what company it is. So just kind of a rough overview of how the offer is structured. I'm not going to go through the entire offer or anything like that, because that's why we have the contracts classes with Debbie Penny. She's been doing this for over 30 years, so I'm going to let her teach the contracts instead of me. So with that being said, I'm going to go on to what you need to know once your buyer has the offer accepted. So what happens first is that escrow is going to get opened. Typically the listing agent opens escrow for everybody. So they're going to give them the accepted contract, and then you're going to need to get your buyer's info to the escrow company, so that way they have that, so that way they can contact the buyer in order to give them the initial wiring instructions. So they need to be able to contact them and provide them with that. You're also going to want to make sure that the lender has a copy of the accepted offer, so that way they can lock the rate in, because they can't do it without an accepted offer, and their, your buyer's rate won't be considered locked until they have that. So make sure that that's getting sent over. And then of course you're going to be scheduling inspections. Debbie Penny actually recommends that you or your buyer be the one to schedule the inspections for the property, and you could give them a couple of times and dates that would work. However, if it's owner occupied, you're going to want to go back to the listing agent and make sure that the listing agent knows and is aware of, the fact that there are, inspections being scheduled, because you don't want to just, show up and be like, hey, here we are for the inspection. And they're like, wait, what inspection? So you want to make sure that you're giving notice to all parties and making sure that you're scheduling all inspections. So this is the general home inspection, the, any other inspections that they want. If it has a chimney, if they want a roof inspection, a sewer inspection, I definitely recommend this if it's on an older home. They'll want to get the sewer inspected. And there's going to be costs that come with all of these things, of course, to the buyer. And it's always up to the buyer whether or not they want to get these things done, because it's at cost to them. But, you're going to suggest like, hey, get these things inspected. They can choose to, to do it or not. Either way, the only thing that they can't really, they don't really have a choice on is if they have a VA loan. So if they're purchasing their home with a VA loan, a termite inspection must be done if it's with a VA loan, if it has a VA loan. So in other states, this isn't the case. But here in California, if there's a VA loan, a termite inspection must be done. So making sure that you get a termite company out there, try to do them all at the same time, because you don't want to inconvenience the sellers as much as you can. Like, try to get them all in one time. However, sometimes it's not, it's not possible. Just with people being backed up, sometimes inspection companies being backed up, sometimes you can't get them all in at the same time. So if that's the case, then then that's to be expected. But I try to get them all done at once if possible. So so make sure that you're doing that, tracking all deadlines. So I've used several different systems at this point. Is mostly, my team knows because they're on this call, but they're the ones who mostly handle all of the buyers. But I used to use the Google Calendar to track deadlines, and I even do this for my listings. So I'll just put like earnest money deposit due, inspection due, loan due, appraisal due, and then closing. So at first, of course, it's going to be easy to keep track of this, but then you don't want to, end up forgetting it either. So you don't want it to be something that you completely miss because, then you've missed that deadline. And if you're in a different state, I think Florida has it to where once it expires, it's gone. So obviously in those sort of states, you're going to have to be a little bit more careful. In California, we're a little bit more lenient on contingency deadlines, but you're going to want to make sure that whatever you track it on is going to be something that you're going to check on a consistent basis, if not like a daily basis. So you're going to put all of those deadlines into your calendar, whether that's like Folio. Folio is a good one to use. I think it only allows you to do up to a certain amount of transactions though. But you can use Folio to track it. Glide allows you to do that if you're a part of CRMLS. Glide allows you to track that too. So whatever system you want to use that you're actually going to track it with, that's what I would use if I were you. I would just use something so that way you don't forget it. Because even if it is your only transaction and your first transaction, there's a lot to juggle in a transaction. And I have a Trello card that has a list of 154 tasks that I have to do from the time that I'm working with I'm not even in escrow, but working with the client to the time that it closes. So, that's a lot of tasks that we do for clients. So you want to make sure that you have that somewhere that you're going to look at it. So you're probably wondering a little bit about what you should track. Kind of like what I was saying on the offer that I just went over, you're going to track your EMD, inspection contingency, loan, appraisal, and then of course, when you're supposed to have your final walkthrough, we'll go over that as well. And of course, closing to make sure that all of these things are on track. If a deadline does need to be extended, you can request an extension via an extension of time addendum. So you can use that in order to, stretch that out a bit. Sometimes though, I do gotta say, I am pretty strict on, hitting the deadlines, but sometimes it's not possible. And honestly, if the listing agent isn't on me about it, sometimes I'll just let that go a little bit, especially if we're only a few days behind. I typically don't like to do that, but sometimes, sometimes the buyer just takes a little bit longer, or we're waiting for a report. If we're waiting for a report, unless the listing agent is, on me about, having that done on time, I won't submit an extension, and it's not necessarily required here. But of course, that's, probably going to vary per state, and, I would go with whatever your broker says. So, but that's just how, that's just how I do things. So if you want to request an extension, it's via the ETA is the acronym for that form in California, and zip forms. And then make sure that when you're going through and tracking those deadlines, that you're looking at the offer and then any counter offers, because you could have said, hey, we'll do 14-day home inspection or inspection contingency. And they came back and said, well, no, we really need you to do 10. And you don't want to miss that. So make sure you have all of the counter offers pulled up if applicable, so that way you can kind of, compare that and make sure that that says what you need it to be, and that you're not missing that. Because sometimes you can look at it and be like, oh, okay, yeah, we were at 7 days, but really it's less than that. So that's going to tell you the most up-to-date info. I also track if the seller has a lease back and when that's up. So if they have a 30-day lease back to where they're staying in the property afterwards, I also put that on my calendar just to track that and make sure that, everything is going as expected. Though technically after the deal is done in California, we don't technically have to be involved, but it doesn't hurt to still be involved and make sure that the seller gets out of there and that the buyer gets the keys and everything. So, I like to track that. And of course, you can always track to the informational access that I was talking about earlier that hasn't, doesn't have anything to do with the inspection, but it's just for informational purposes. But I would track that too, just so that way you know when the buyer has like to go in there and to do any other, just to look at the property again, bring a friend back or whatever they're wanting to do. And then it doesn't hurt to track all of the other deadlines on that grid, just to see, like, just to make sure that everything is being done on time. And then that brings me to like earnest money deposit, contingencies, closing. But let's talk about contingencies a little bit. So you have a loan, appraisal, and inspection contingency. Contingency is just a deadline within the contract, and that's when the a certain item is expected to be performed by. So the typical amount for that is 17 days. So I believe it's 17 days. Let me go back for a second. Yeah, so 17 days for everything. It used to be different. It used to be more time for a loan. It used to be 21 days for a loan, but as of right now, the standard is 17 days. But as a buyer's agent, I would recommend always tailoring those down. So they're not always going to be 17 days. It may be 10, 10, and 10, or 10, 14, and they're all going to be different. So go back and compare that on your form, whatever one that you're using if you're not in California. So let's talk a little bit about the home inspection first, or not the home inspection, but the inspection contingency. So the inspection contingency is going to encompass all aspects of the property. So it's not just the buyer getting and doing the physical portion of the home inspection. So they're also pulling data online, they're driving the area, they're making sure that they're comfortable, they're looking at, anything and everything that they want to know, crime rates, Megan's Law database, going to the city to pull permits, because you don't want to pull permits as a buyer's agent, because that's actually considered out of our scope of practice. So this is just part of the buyer's due diligence here. So they're, if they want a survey, if they want soil samples, if they want to know more about just anything about the property and the surrounding area, it's on the buyer to do this themselves. So making sure that you're not doing the buyer's job for them, because that's, all of these things are out of your scope of practice. Like, you're not doing a home inspection, you're not, pulling permits, you're not driving the area, you're not, doing all of these things for the buyer, because you're not the buyer. The buyer has, some responsibility whenever they're purchasing a home and, to do these things. So you want to make sure that your buyer isn't relying on you, to pull permits and pull all of this data for them. Did anybody have any questions before I go on?
Yeah, not so much about the form, but liability wise, is there any liability from us if the inspector missed anything? So I know we offered the vendor list, but for whatever reason that home inspector is not up to par, is there a possibility we could get sued?
I mean, there's always a possibility you can get sued for pretty much anything.
Okay.
People are pretty sue happy, but so this is the reason why people are saying, provide 3 different vendors. If you provide 3 different vendors and don't just tell them to use one, then they're less likely to come back and point the finger at you. However, if you're like, hey, use this company, and I'm guilty of this, like, hey, use this company. If that company misses something, then, sometimes, they could come back to you and say, hey, this company missed this, I was relying on you, but that's out of your scope of practice, right? You're not responsible for inspecting that property or ensuring accuracy of the home inspector, because that's outside of our scope of practice. We can't ensure, anything about, like a home inspector, a roofer, a structural engineer, a soil, somebody doing a soil sample, whatever you call them. We can't, like a plumber, an electrician, like we can't verify that they are doing a great job and that they know what they're talking about. Of course, depending on your background, you may know more than even the electrician does, just depending on your background. But the thing is that you're not representing them as their electrician, you're representing them as their buyer's agent. So, there are plenty of people that have attorney backgrounds and all that. But our role is just to be able to provide, just tell them that, okay, these are the options that are available. Whoever they choose, that's on them. Like, that's on them and the company. I had once where the buyer hired the company. The company went out and inspected, and turns out, of course, they were blaming it on the home inspection company, but I think it was more of like, it wasn't raining at the time because there was a balcony on the second floor that I guess wasn't sloped or something the right way. And so, there was an issue with that, and they were blaming it on the home inspection company. Luckily they weren't blaming it on me, but they did come back to me and say, hey, we're having a problem with this. I didn't personally like either how the home inspection company handled it. I was hoping that they would have handled it in a better way, but unfortunately I don't have control over that. I did the best that I could. And of course, I'm not the home inspection company's client. They are. They're the ones who pay for the home inspection, not me. So, point is that we do the best we can, and we provide them with a list of vendors, and then they can choose. And the thing is that most of my clients are like, it's up to you. Like, you're the expert. Who do you recommend? And so at that point, you can recommend somebody, but that's basically out of your control how well of a job that home inspection company does. Like, I use Elite Home Inspection Group, and they have been phenomenal, and had that one experience where they missed something. So, it can be pretty subjective.
Okay. Would it be worth it to put like a liability clause in the vendor list? No.
Well, I actually do. I say something to the effect of, I cannot guarantee their, what do I say? I can't guarantee their workmanship or something like that.
Okay.
So I do have a little bit of a thing in there to say that, like, hey, I'm not responsible for, what they come back and quote you. I'm not responsible for, if they do a bad job. Because I have, referred people contractors. And of course, as we all know, contractors can do a really bad job a lot of the time. So, I've had people come back and their contractor didn't do, the contractor that I recommended didn't do a great job, and they ended up having to use somebody else, and they ended up losing money. Luckily, they didn't blame me, but, I provided, that contact to them, but at the end of the day, they're the ones choosing it.
Okay, thank you.
Probably a long-winded way of saying it, but sorry, I'm fixing all my spelling errors. I hate spelling errors. Does anybody else have any questions before I continue? Okay. All right. So, like I said, buyer must do their own due diligence. You can have the buyer pull the permits and go to the city. The reason is that, again, all the legalities of pulling permits and pulling records and all of that for the client is, say they were buying a home that, there was an extra bedroom that wasn't permitted, and you went to the city for them, and the city accidentally only gave you 3 of the 4 permit items that were available. And you provide that to the client, they ended up closing, and then there was an issue afterwards. Who do you think they're going to point the finger at? They're going to point the finger at you, right? Because you're the one who pulled that permit. However, if they went to the city and the city ended up not giving them all of the paperwork, then who are they going to blame? They're going to blame the city. The city didn't give it all to them, and that's on the buyer. So making sure that you're not, taking on legalities that you shouldn't be taking on, and the goal is to not get sued in real estate. So you want to make sure that you're covering yourself because you don't want to do things that, can put your license in harm's way. So make sure that you're, not pulling permits, not pulling data for the client. They need to do everything because, one of the biggest questions that I have is like, hey, what's the crime rate? Sorry, that's a no-go. I can't tell you crime rates. You gotta go online. You gotta, drive the area. Have them drive the area at night. That's probably one of the best things to do. I had a client that was in escrow once, and it was kind of a sketchy area to me, but who am I to say that, right? It's so really subjective. So what's, unsafe to me may be just fine to them. So I was like, you know what? This is, they're from the local area and they know the area, but they said that, one night they, were just driving around and there ended up being some sort of sketchy situation down the street and they decided that they were canceling. So, it's really all subjective. So it's like the best thing to do is just have them drive at night. So they were driving at night, realized that there were some really sketchy situations happening at that corner pretty much on a nightly basis. So they're like, hey, I don't want to purchase this property. And I'm just like, I would never force somebody to buy a property that they don't feel safe at. So, but it's not my responsibility and to tell them what areas are safe and what areas are not safe. Because that's really subjective. Like it even varies between me and David. David can say like, oh, this isn't a great area. And I'm like, wait, what are you talking about? So, it's pretty subjective. That's why you never tell your clients what a safe area is. And plus it can be considered steering. So you definitely want to stay away from that. And then they may choose other aspects of the home to be inspected. Like if they have a home inspection, and on the home inspection report, it might say like, hey, we noticed that, there was this leak in the plumbing underneath the sink. They may want to have another professional come out to look at that. Or if there's foundation issues, they can bring out a structural engineer. So the general home inspection is basically just kind of what it sounds like, general home inspection, where they're getting the entire house inspected and then the inspector is just telling you what he or she perceives as issues with the property. So there may be other items that they need to actually bring in more people to take a look at the property. And then our job is only to do a visual inspection of the property. We're not actually doing what the home inspector does. We're only doing a visual. Ryan.
Hey, sorry, bringing it back to like the safety of like an area. So what if the client is like very pushy about whether or not, like, what's your opinion about like the safety of the neighborhood? Are you able to refer them to like the crime rate kind of thing over here? Because I feel like that's a question that Sam and I have continuously got.
Yeah.
Like, is it safe or not?
Right?
Yeah, exactly. So like how do you go about responding to that question where you're not just like completely saying like, sorry, I'm not replying to it, but giving them something valuable?
So I pretty much tell them what I told you guys is that, what feels safe to me may not feel safe to you, and that's really subjective. And then I would point them to citydata.org, so the way they can do their own research. So it's city-data.org, and they can look up crime rates, there themselves. But I mean, it is Los Angeles, so like crime is everywhere. But what feels safe to them may not feel safe to you, and then the other way around. So you'd be like, yeah, this area is safe. And then they go there and they're like, Ryan, cars are being broken into and, all of these things are happening. You told me this area was safe, so it, you really steer away from like trying to tell people what's safe and what's not. What you can say though is like, hey, most people are finding these areas to be more desirable. And so you're pointing to like somebody telling you. And so like here, most people find areas west of the 405 to be more desirable, but there's plenty of people east of the 405 that feel just fine. And you're east of the 405 too. So, there's ways to say it and not get yourself in trouble and not like try to steer them towards a certain direction. Like most people get that suggestion when they move here is they're like, stay west of the 405, but that's not necessarily the case. But you can say, most people find these areas more desirable, but it doesn't mean that those other areas couldn't be, as, desirable as well. So, does that help?
Yeah, it does. I think it's just like when you get into the conversation about like investment properties and stuff like that with clients, I think it's kind of like a kind of a double-edged sword, because it's like, oh, like, is this like a good, not necessarily like you wouldn't find good investment properties everywhere, but like, it's like, where do you find the valuable properties? Okay, but is it safe? And then you say west of the 405, east of the 405. It's just like kind of hard to go either way with that.
Yeah, I know, but whenever I tell people, like, if I explain that to them, like, hey, it's really subjective, I can't really tell you what areas are safe. And you can even say, like, I am legally not allowed to steer you in one direction or the other because of the fact that, certain people are protected, and we don't want to make it appear like we're telling one person to stay west of the 405 and telling another person east of the 405 is fine. So we just want to make sure that we're staying away from not making any sort of, not that you are, but not, steering people one direction over the other.
Definitely, that makes sense.
Because sometimes people are like, oh, I just want a safe area. What's a safe area? And they'll keep on with me. And I'm just like, I'm sorry, I'm not legally able to tell you that because it's super subjective. And what's maybe safe to you isn't safe to me, and the other way around. And then most people understand and they're like, oh, okay. But I think that's like the number one question that you get asked, especially when helping military. Ryan Logan.
So do you ever use RPR at all?
RPR, yeah.
Okay. I just sent my buyers a neighborhood report and I didn't know anything about the
Oh, sweet.
city data.
I didn't know that. I didn't even think that.
Yeah, I was just curious if it was accurate or not. Sometimes
I don't know.
Okay. Fair enough.
Yeah, I mean, you could send that to them because you can send them like reports of demographics and such. You just can't, a certain like purple generation don't go to this purple area, you know what I mean? So I have to use like non-descriptive colors. So
Got it.
but anyways, Ryan Holt, does that help?
Oh
Yeah.
yeah. Oh, sorry.
Okay. Oh,
No.
Ryan.
Yeah, all good on my end.
Okay, good.
I have a question then going off of that.
Okay.
So what do you do if they say, oh, but what would you do? Or like if they're stuck between a few properties, they'd be like, what would you do? And then you say, like, you can't answer that really, but then they're like, oh, but what would you do? Like they keep asking you, what would you do?
They
And I'm
keep
like,
asking you guys that?
I don't know what?
They keep asking you that?
Well, yeah, one of our past clients did, and we're like, I don't know how to answer you. Yeah.
I think that's hard, but you still go back to like, maybe if you're not saying that you can't legally tell them which areas to stay away from, and give them like factual information. You just can't, it's just a fine line to walk. Like I just err on the side of caution with everything.
Right.
So
Yeah,
I'm
I would
a
say pros
super
and cons,
cautious
like-
person.
Yeah.
But I've heard other realtors, and I'm not saying this is okay, but I've heard other realtors tell them, and I'm like, you can't just tell them like, don't go to West Carson because it's unsafe. Like, I'm not saying West Carson's unsafe. I'm just using it as an example.
Yeah.
Don't go to East Torrance because it's unsafe, because
Right.
a little sketchy area to me, but maybe it's okay to somebody else. Like, who am I to say what somebody else will find safe? Like, I don't know them. Like, I don't know you. And I've had a client ask me like, well, what would you do? I'm like, I'm not buying this house. I'm not living here. What does it matter what I think? Because it doesn't matter.
Right.
But I know what you're saying. Like, you want to come across as helpful, and I know it's hard.
I just said what I kept like not answering their question because my answer would obviously probably be different than theirs, like you obviously, but like if you just make a list of pros and cons for each property, if you're really concerned about location and if this house has something that this one doesn't, then just see it on paper in front of you, and then maybe that will help. But even we got that so much But I
Yeah,
guess that's just what's gonna happen.
that's just what, yeah, that's just is what it is. Like you're gonna consistently, like, I'm sure you guys have seen, like, when people are filling out that that Google form, they're always asking for safe areas.
Yeah.
So, but
Okay,
I don't
thank you.
know. That's always the hardest thing because you want to be helpful.
Yeah.
At the same time, you're also trying to protect yourself. So, but I would just stick with, like, you know, what I was saying. So, all right. Any other questions?
The leased or lien items, I guess up
Huh?
under the leased or lien items up under the, I guess that's L7.
Oh, wait. Oh, you're talking about on the offer. I was like, what is he talking about?
Oh, sorry.
Oh, leased or leaned. I had no idea what you were saying.
Is that
Sorry.
something we're covering later, or is that part
Oh,
of
I wasn't, so I'm not covering the offer today.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah, no, like I said, I leave that to Debbie Penny. She will teach you all about that contract. But she does like forms on a rotational basis. So, but leased or liened items are like mostly for solar or water softeners or you know, stuff like that.
Right.
But that actually brings me to a point about solar, because if you're buying a property with solar on it, you want to make sure that the buyer can assume that lease or lien in their during their inspection period. It's actually something I meant to cover, but I didn't get a chance to write it down. So a lot of properties here have solar panels on them. So depending on if they're paid off, then that's not a problem. The problem comes in whenever there's a lease or liened item on there. So for anything, whether it's solar panels or something else, you want to make sure that, you know, you figure that out during escrow. Of course, you probably would have already had that discussion with the listing agent upon writing the offer, but if you have not, you want to make sure that if it's a loan or a lien, that your buyer can assume it, or the seller is paying it off, or if the buyer is okay with paying it off. And then you want to figure out that whole process. I think the hardest thing comes in is if it's on a hero loan with the solar, because then it depends on each buyer's lender whether or not they can assume that. And if they can't, then the buyer and the seller have to come to some sort of negotiation to figure out whether or not, you know, what to do, because then the buyer can back out. And you definitely want to be able to protect your buyer if they aren't able to do that, and if they don't want to pay for that lease or assume the lease, then they can get out of the contract without losing their EMD. But of course, they have that time period in the offer in order to like, they have that period to figure that out, and you're there to help them with that. So thank you for bringing that up. Actually, I actually meant to cover that. But actually, after I cover in contingencies, we're going to go back to this form. Does that answer your question?
Yes, definitely.
Okay. All right, so let's continue on with inspections though. So once all inspections are complete, so you want to make sure that you have all reports in before discussing inspections with your buyers. Make sure that you received all seller disclosures as well, just so that way you can kind of go over everything with them. Sometimes you don't have the prelim in when you're discussing the seller disclosures, but just making sure that everything is received before you can even talk about submitting a repair request. If you're submitting a repair request, sometimes on properties the buyer decides not to. So sometimes that's the case, but making sure that everything is received. Like if you're waiting on the termite, don't discuss everything before you, I mean, of course it's up to you, but then you'll be constantly talking to your buyer, like probably every day about inspections. So I like to just gather everything and just talk about it all at once. Yeah, it may take an hour, hour and a half, but it's better than like, oh, well, the home inspection came in, let's talk about that. And then termite inspection came in, let's talk about that. And then, you know what I mean? So making sure that all seller disclosures are received. So there's a whole list of seller disclosures. You know, I may go over that at some point, but I don't have enough time to do that today. But making sure that, you know, this the listing agent is getting you seller disclosures within the time period on the form as well, because if you do not receive those disclosures within the time period, so say it's 7 days, if it's 7 days and you receive it on the 8th day, guess what? You get 5 extra days on top of that. So it's good for you as a buyer, not so great if you're a listing agent. So making sure that all of those things are received, because the prelim and the natural hazard disclosures, the transfer disclosure statement, and the seller property questionnaire, all of those, and then some, there are some other standard disclosures that you'll want to receive in order to mark all of those as received. But you're discussing every form with your client. You don't have to like read through it all or anything. You can give like a brief synopsis of like what the form is about. If it's disclosures, then you're going over any of the items that were marked yes, and anything on those disclosures that, like if the seller described, hey, a leak happened back in 2015, we filed an insurance claim, yada yada. Make sure that your client, I mean, of course, they're going to have a copy of that disclosure, but make sure your client is good with that. If it was all, you know, if of course, if an insurance claim was filed, you can go back to the listing agent, ask for, you know, a copy of that insurance claim to make sure that all of that was repaired and everything is okay. Sometimes, you know, with leaks and such, they may not be resolved in the best manner. Maybe mold is left or something after, well, I'm talking more about like ongoing leaks, but just making sure that all of those things were resolved to the buyer's satisfaction, that they don't have any additional questions, because you know, that's the time to, you know, gather their questions to go back to the listing agent and make sure that you're putting that in writing to the listing agent, even if you are going to call them, so that way you have that. And so, yeah, so, and then if the property is purchased using a VA loan, a termite clearance is required in California. So as you're going over the, you know, all of the inspection reports, don't be alarmed if it does come back with $5,000 worth of termite damage that needs to be resolved. That's pretty typical here in California. It just means that the property needs to be fumed, so it needs to have a tent put over it. I don't know if you guys saw the Fusion community, but there's a big old portion. Have you guys driven by or down Aviation lately, guys? The local agents, anyways, my team. I can't see everybody, so I don't know. But maybe not, but they have this giant building that's covered in tenting. But termites are very prevalent here. So pretty much every property has termites. So I think we're all, as agents, used to it. But if your buyer may not be used to that, so that may scare them a bit if it comes back with termite damage. So making sure that, you know, you're setting that expectation too whenever you're whenever they get accepted, or, you know, even before they get accepted, just kind of doing, you know, general education about the purchase process. Maybe when you have that buyer consult, you can explain to them about this, but at some point you should have already explained that to them. But if not, you can always explain it to them now, that, you know, you're not surprised that it came back with termites that need to be resolved, but those always need to be done prior to closing. And so you can ask for the seller to cover this And a lot of the times the seller will cover the damage. And then if not, the buyer can pay for it. That wasn't always the case. It used to be that the buyer was not allowed to pay for termite repairs, but now buyers are able to pay for it. So they can pay for it at closing. So basically what you do is there's a little portion that you fill out at the bottom of the termite inspection report that says that the buyer is paying for it out of escrow. So if that happens, never have a buyer pay for it before closing, because then they're putting money out on a property they don't own yet. Or another case is that the seller could pay for it and the buyer can reimburse them at closing if the seller doesn't agree to pay for it. So there are several options whenever it comes to figuring out how to get those termite repairs done. So let me go to the next page, because then we're going to talk about when repairs are done. So let's see, already kind of talked about what expectations or setting expectations with your buyers about what to expect, because you're always going to have a page or two worth of items. And especially if it's an older property, if it's an older property, you're probably going to want to expect even 3 to 4 to 5. And that might sound like a lot, but you're buying an as-is home. And so, any repairs or credits that the seller is willing to make is just a bonus. So that's how I explain it anyways. But yeah, I usually see a page or two worth of items on the home inspection report. And this can even be on fairly new houses. Sometimes on even new houses, there's at least a page of things that need to be done. So this is typical and expected. So just letting your client know, like if you want to, kind of prep them at the beginning of the call, if you have a chance to. And then just try to minimize what the buyer is asking for, especially in a seller's market. In a buyer's market, you may be able to, get a little bit more, but during a seller's market, you don't want to ask for everything in the kitchen sink and the bathtub and everything. So making sure that they're not asking for an astronomical amount of credit or repairs or both. So just, knowing what is actually considered a major repair item. Even some foundation repairs can be pretty minor. So just knowing that, not everything that comes back on the report is, is going to have to be like a do or die sort of situation. So the buyer can ask for several different things. So they can ask for all of the items to be repaired. So whatever items that they want to ask for to be repaired, I typically tell them that asking for cosmetic items aren't a great idea, because then like, oh, well, this carpet has a stain on it. Can I ask for it to be replaced? You can, but the most likely thing is going to be that the seller is going to say no, because it's typically it's a seller's market here in California. So people typically aren't asking for those sort of things. And if they do, the listing agent is probably going to tell you like, hey, we're just going to go with this backup offer. They're ready and willing to buy this home. So that's what we're going to do. But, some items that, need to actually be repaired. So you can ask for, your buyer can ask for a certain list of repairs. They can ask for a credit. They can ask for a price reduction, or they can ask for a little bit of both. They can ask for, like, typically what I see if I'm working with a VA buyer, they'll ask for termite to be done and complete, but then they'll also ask for, sorry, I lost train of thought. So they'll ask for termite to be done, and then they'll ask for credit. I've even seen people ask for a price reduction and then other repairs. So they can ask for a little bit of everything. Sam, do you have a question? I kind of see your, kind of seems like your wheels are turning over there. So, oh, okay. Yeah. Anybody have questions on this before I go? Or
Are you
before
saying
continuing?
that? Are you saying they ask for termite inspection to be paid for by the seller, or the termite repairs based on the termite inspection?
Repairs. No, the The termite report is the buyer's responsibility. But the termite repairs are negotiable.
Awesome, thanks.
Hi, Nick. I didn't even see you on this call. But yeah, that's a good question. But yeah, just depending on what they want to do, they can, you know, do a combination of those things. And then it goes on a repair request. So a request for repair in zip forms. It's the RR form for those of you in California. I pretty much know all of the acronyms by now. Pretty much. Oh, and then what I wanted to say too is like, so you're submitting that form over to the listing agent, right? Now the form has a time period on it to where the seller has to respond back by a certain time, and it used to not be the case. But so usually if the seller agrees to the buyer's request, they'll usually ask for all inspection or the inspection contingency to be removed. So just prepare your buyers that, you know, if the seller agrees to all of this, that means that you're ready to remove your inspection contingency. This means that you are satisfied with all of the seller disclosures. You're satisfied with all aspects of the home, that you've inspected everything that you need to, and you're completely satisfied with the property, and you're willing to move forward and purchase the property should the seller agree to this. I like to have the conversation then to make sure that they understand that they would be removing their inspection contingency should the seller agree to everything. And then I also like to talk to them about what happens and what their stance is if the seller comes back and agrees to half the items or no items. Like if they agree to no items, is this going to be a deal breaker? Like what's going to happen if the seller says no? And of course, if it's less than $5,000 or even sometimes less than $10,000, depending on the property, you know, why are they willing to walk away from a property for less than $5,000 worth of repairs? So, and it doesn't technically mean that all of those items on the list are like, they are a must to be repaired. It's just a recommendation by the home inspector. So, but anyways, as you can see, I like to set a lot of expectations because, you know, if you're working with first-time home buyers, they don't know this. So you want to make sure that you're explaining, you know, what their options are, and also tampering down expectations of what to expect should the seller come back and say no. Because, you know, what I've seen is typically when you're submitting a repair request, at least, well, I was going to say at least before this crazy COVID market, was the seller would come back and usually agree to half of the items. So we would basically, you know, submit more of a request with the anticipation that the seller is going to come back and agree to half of it. Anyways, I feel like I've been talking absolutely forever. I'm not even done yet. So who wants to ask me something? Who has questions? Do you have anything to add, David? Okay. All right. Okay. All right, so I'm going to move on to the appraisal contingency. So the appraisal is an opinion of value, and keep in mind that this is for the lender, not the buyer. So this is for the lender to ensure that should the buyer default, they can get their full amount and the full value back should the buyer, you know, stop making payments. So this is the reason why the appraisal happens, is to make it so that way the lender can get, you know, get their full value back and get their money back and resell the property should the buyer default on it. So that's the reason why the appraisal happens. It's not for the buyer, it's for their lender. So there's a couple options when it comes to the appraisal contingency. And I know there's a lot of contention with the VA loan whenever it comes to the appraisal contingency. So let's talk about this, and I may have David jump in since he's now in here, but the buyer can waive appraisal The thing is if it's with a VA loan, they technically still have an appraisal in place. So if you look on the offer, removal of appraisal contingency does not eliminate appraisal cancellation rights in FVAC. So the FVAC form is the FBA or FHA VA mandatory clause. So if you go read it, it states that pretty much that the appraisal contingency still stays in place, even though your buyer may select no appraisal contingency. Just know that they're covered by the VA. So even if the appraisal came back and it wasn't at value, they can still back out per that contingency. And so we've talked about this with my team several times. Sometimes VA buyers will, remove that, even though technically they still have it in place. So do you want to talk to that a little bit about what that means? I know you weren't expecting to jump in.
No. It just means that they can still back out. I mean, it's clear on the RPA. It's not our responsibility to explain it to the other agent. They need to know it, but it's right there on the form, and the form even identifies that even if the appraisal is waived, they still have the rights under the FVAC. So we can make their offers look stronger, even though they could still exercise their appraisal right. And it's not our duty to disclose the fact that they can still exercise their appraisal right to the other agent, because it's right there on the form. So it's a way to make the offers look stronger without losing that right to back out.
Go ahead.
So I've been hearing this a lot, and I've been with a couple of friends of mine who've bought homes through the VA loan.
Mm-hmm.
In our market, a lot of the homes are, I wouldn't say necessarily overpriced, and I'm not trying to get over on anybody, but what are some strategies there that I could suggest to the seller's agent as far as making their appraisal value higher?
I mean, to try to get the appraisal up, the biggest thing is them providing comps and justification as to why the house justifies a higher value. So differences in lot size, differences in construction year, construction quality, upgrades, all those types of things. And unfortunately, listing agents don't normally do that. They just expect the appraiser to go in and do that. And a lot of appraisers, because they get, loaded down with so many appraisals, they're going through and just getting them done as soon as they can. So they're just looking at quick data, making some adjustments for square footage, not really much adjustment for the lot size. There should also be adjustments, obviously, for the time duration since the last property sold. Although they won't give you the full adjustment for what's actually been happening, there should still be an appreciation adjustment there. So, there should be a bunch of those different adjustments. And as the listing agent, if you're on the listing side, they should be providing that on the buyer's agent side. The way that you can assist with that is help put some of that stuff together for the listing agent and send it over to them for them to provide to the appraiser.
And would that include like comps of other homes that have sold recently in the area?
Yeah, I'd use the comps. I would even, put a description on why you believe it should adjust up from the comps, if that's the case, what your perceived value of the adjustment would be. Right, the appraiser is not necessarily going to follow what you give them, but the easier you make their job, the more likely it is that they'll use the data that you provide.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just had a quick question on the appraisal contingency. So do you think there would ever be a situation where the seller would see that a VA loan waived the appraisal contingency and go hypothetically, they'd assume that the buyer or the buyer's agent is trying to pull one over on them? Full well knowing that you can't do that because it's written in the RPA. If so, how would you reply to that situation without damaging that relationship?
I would say if we were trying to pull something over on you, we wouldn't be checking a box right above where it says that removing this does not remove it from the FVAC. It's very clear. This is a contracts-based business. We expect everyone to read and know their contracts. We're not submitting a different form. We're not whiting stuff out. We're not doing anything, any funny business. We're literally using the form that is crafted by California Association of Realtors legal team that was released in December of last year, and we're using the exact form that everyone else uses. So that's how I would counter it.
Okay, cool. Appreciate it.
Anyways. Okay. All right. Okay, well, not moving on, but continuing on. All right, so Brian and Sam, did that answer you guys' questions that you have for me prior to this call? Yeah.
Yeah, I think most of it was just like learning more about contingencies in general. So it's kind of a broad question at that.
Oh, okay. Okay. Is this helping?
Definitely.
Okay, good. All right. Let's see. So also when you're writing the offer, the buyer can also cover a certain amount of appraisal gap. So if you do have that VA buyer and they're like, you know, I don't want to remove an appraisal contingency if it's technically in place, you can also have them cover a certain amount of appraisal difference. So if they're paying $800,000, if they're offering $800,000 on a property and it appraises at $790,000, and if they're like, hey, I'll pay $10,000 in an appraisal shortage, then, you know, that's also an option for them to do should the VA appraisal come back lower than what they're purchasing the property for. So that allows them to basically put a cap on what they're going to take out of pocket in order to cover that cost. And that, you know, that money just doesn't disappear, kind of acts like a down payment, and it goes towards the loan. So it's not like they're just giving that over to the bank and it just disappears. It goes towards their loan. So it just decreases their loan balance, if that makes sense. So, but, you know, those are two options to waive an appraisal. Of course, you can still have the appraisal in place, but we're talking about things that can, you know, can be done. So, you know, they can cover that certain amount of appraisal gap. So just, you know, chatting with your client after the appraisal comes back. On a VA, if it comes back low, that's what you call a tide water. And that's what David was talking about earlier. You know, you would have you would submit comps, the seller, the listing agent would submit comps on the property in order to try to get the value up. And we've done this successfully for multiple clients. We had a really crazy scenario a few years ago on a property, like the worst appraisal we had ever gone through. So it came back, what, 140K, 136K below what they purchased the property for. The appraiser was using comps that weren't valid. He would only use properties that were in a PUD, even though the home was considered a single family home. That was a crazy, I think, 2-week situation where we didn't know what was going to happen. We actually had to submit a complaint to the VA about this specific appraiser, and lo and behold, he brought the value back up to where it needed to be. Thankfully, that property closed, but that was probably one of the worst appraisals that we have ever been through, and hopefully we don't have any other ones that are that horrific. But it can be quite a battle to get through low appraisals, and it can be a little bit drawn out, and it can delay escrow by a week or so if you're battling with an appraiser that was bad. So basically, this appraiser was violating VA guidelines. So that was how we were able to successfully get the value where it needed to be, because the appraiser basically was violating those VA guidelines that he wasn't supposed to. So yeah, somebody has a question.
Yeah, I'm not sure, you may have answered it already, but what happens in the situation that the seller has the price set up and we go through the process and the appraisal comes up that the house is worth more than what the seller originally placed, like, and we already agreed upon a price and then what we're gonna move forward?
So
Does it
kind of
have-
like what I already said, so this is for the lender and not the buyer. So it's great if the appraisal comes in higher. That just means that, you know, the buyer can move forward and they, you know, it doesn't necessarily mean they got a deal, just because it's just an opinion of one person's, you know, it's just one person's opinion of value. So it just means that they're able to get their loan and there's no issues and great, it appraised higher, but it doesn't affect their loan. Like they're still going to be, you know, their loan is still going to remain the same. It's not going to go up.
So they wouldn't be able to say, hey, you know what, the house appraised for more, so I want to sell it for more, and then like, oh, well,
No.
we got an agreement.
No.
Okay.
Yeah. Great question. Go ahead.
With the appraisal, I know typically the buyer pays for it. Is that coming out of the money that they owe the lender in that case?
It'll
Or
come out. It depends on how the lender does it. Some lenders have them pay before the appraiser goes out, and some of them have the buyer pay at closing.
and is that reimbursable if this seller asks, or excuse me, if the buyer asks for it?
No. It's
Or
not
like
reimbursable.
can the seller, is that an option for the seller to pay for that for the buyer? That makes
No.
sense.
No, the
Okay.
buyer needs to pay for that.
I mean, they could. but we
They
never see
could,
it.
but that's not going to happen.
Yeah, we never see it.
Right. I'm just curious because, you know, the whole cash buyer thing. So they're gonna have to come out of pocket with that as well. Got it.
Yeah, you were representing the buyers on that, right?
Yeah.
Buying with all cash.
Right.
There's no appraisal in all cash, so
Oh, there's no, okay.
there's no appraisal or loan unless they're doing like a hard money loan.
Right. So it's just an unnecessary step.
Right.
Got it.
Yep. It's what makes all cash better sometimes. You don't have those extra contingencies, so. All right, and then, so say the buyer wasn't willing to or didn't have the money to cover the difference between what it appraised at and what they paid for it, they can go back and negotiate and see if the seller can lower the purchase price. So that is one option, is to go back to the seller and ask them if they would be willing to lower the price. In a softer market, that could probably be a thing. If you would have asked somebody 2 months ago to do that, they probably would have just blew you off. But you know, it can happen. The seller can lower the price. We actually, Drew, wasn't that your transaction where we got the appraisal? Like,
150K low.
yeah, 150K low.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it came in 150K lower than what we went under contract for, and they ended up coming down. We were also like, I think almost 2 months into escrow at that point for other reasons. So
It was actually good that you were in escrow that long because of the appraisal thing.
I know, I think that ended up helping us out a little bit.
Yeah, so that was awesome, but that usually doesn't happen in a seller's market. So, so that was pretty awesome. And then let's see. Of course, if the buyer has their appraisal contingency in place, they could just back out and be like, I can't pay for this out of pocket. You know, some of our military families that are buying with a VA loan, unfortunately, a lot of them just don't have the cash in order to give towards a low appraisal. So in that case, like they just back out and go after a different property that, you know, maybe is more realistically priced, and, you know, not as many buyers are going after it. So, you know, that is an option if the buyer is like, I don't have the money, or I don't want to spend the money in order to give for the low appraisal, and the seller isn't willing to work with them. Then, you know, because there's several different options as well, you know, the ones that I already covered, and like, you know, the seller and buyer can meet halfway, like, hey, I'll only do it halfway up to the you know, what the purchase price and the appraisal came back at. So if it was a 10K difference, if they're like, hey, I'm only willing to cover 5, and the buyer's like, okay, I'll just do the other 5. You know, if none of those are options for them, then they can just back out and they'll get their earnest money deposit back. The only time that they don't do that is if they waived the appraisal, then they decide that they're gonna back out. Of course, like we already covered, the VA loan, technically they still have that appraisal in place, so. But does appraisals now make a little bit more sense to you guys? And hopefully I didn't confuse
Yeah.
anybody even further. All right, something that I wanted to cover that I didn't end up covering was back when I was talking about seller disclosures. Again, everything has a deadline and everything has a timeline where things are due. And seller disclosures is one of them. I already covered that. But if it's in a condo and has an HOA, there's also a timeline for that. So common interest disclosures. So that would be one of the items to get back. So say you have, say your inspection contingency is due to be removed and you don't have HOA docs back, or you don't have seller disclosures back. What you can do is you can remove just the physical portion of that inspection contingency, and you don't have to remove seller disclosures, prelim, and HOA docs if you do not have those back yet. So you can remove those when those come in. So you can remove those at a later time, especially if they're not in yet, or if your buyer hasn't had time to review those. You can have, you can remove inspection technically for physical inspection without removing those items, if that makes sense. Ryan, you look confused.
All good.
That's
Oh,
yeah.
other Ryan, sorry.
No, I'm good. Sorry, I was reading your screen.
Oh, okay. But yeah, so hopefully that makes sense. Because sometimes, the listing agent will be like, hey, can you please remove your inspection contingency? And you're like, well, we're still waiting on such and such to come in. So then you would just remove, just the physical portion of it. So, but then all inspection contingencies or all contingencies have to be removed before closing. So you just want to make sure that if you haven't removed those, to remove everything before you close. All right.
How is that documented that you remove those?
Actually, I'll show you real quick.
Sorry, everybody.
Hold on, let me see something. So if you type in, oh wait, why is it coming up? Oh wait. So there's a contingency removal form. So you can remove, so here's all this is the form that you would use, and then here's the list of all the items that would need to be removed during the period of escrow. So loan, appraisal, investigation of property. So either the entire buyer's investigation contingency or only part of the investigation related to inspections concerning physical attributes of the property. That's the one I was talking about. All buyer investigations other than physical. So like if you were able to get everything in, but you haven't seen the property yet, then that would be the time that you would check that. Entire buyer's investigation except, so if you're like, we got everything except for condo docs, then that's what you would put. Review of all seller documents. So you can just remove review of all seller documents except prelim title, HOA docs and disclosures, review of lease or liened items. So if they haven't provided the solar paperwork or anything like that, then you wouldn't be removing that until you have figured that out. So that still gives, so for every item that you're not removing, that's an out for the buyer because it's part of their inspection contingency. That's the reason why all of these are in here. Of course, except for loan and appraisal, is because it's related to the buyer investigation. So all of those items. And then,
You
of
just
course,
do,
you can remove, oh, I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say you do a different form every time you remove something. So if there was an exception,
Uh-huh.
okay.
Yeah. So if you're just removing loan, then the next time you remove something, you just go number 2, remove appraisal, number 3. So you may have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different contingency removals, depending on how the escrow went and what, if, of course, if they're removing entire inspection, sometimes they'll remove both the loan and the appraisal at the same time. It's just a mix of different things depending on, what came in. So you definitely want to be on your game and know if the prelim came in, because then what happens if you remove the entire investigation, including the prelim and all of these, but your buyer hasn't gotten them yet, or your buyer doesn't understand them yet, or something like that, then you're putting your buyer at risk because you didn't explain to them that, like, hey, if you haven't received these things yet, we probably shouldn't remove them because you haven't had a chance to either look at them, you don't understand them yet, blah, blah, blah. So you just want to make sure that you're also getting all of these things in an email written to them, that they understand that by signing this inspection contingency removal, this means that you are fully satisfied with all aspects of the property. You have completed all of your inspections. You understand and have read all of the seller disclosure, yada, yada. So you might want to come up with some sort of standard language there that they can acknowledge, and you can tell them, hey, I'm sending you this contingency removal, but I'm also going to send you an email that says that you understand what it means, because, oh Lord, I have been in escrows where, like, I'm having them remove appraisal or something, and they're like, well, I don't understand what this means. And then we'll start talking about things, and come to find out they didn't understand what removing their inspection meant, even though that they said that they did verbally. I want it in writing, so that way if they decide they want to sue me afterwards, if something bad happened, then I can point back to this email and say, hey, you said yes and read and acknowledged that you understood what you were signing. So we're making sure that each time they're removing a contingency, you get it in writing in a separate email that says that, hey, you understand that you're removing these things. So. Make sense to everybody?
Yeah, it does.
Okay. And this is actually the reason why I resonate so well with Debbie Penny, our broker, because she is very, if you've ever been to a contracts class, she's very, very direct about all of these things, and she is very risk averse like I am. So, and then let's talk about the loan contingency. So if your buyer submitted the offer, they'll have a pre-approval. Sometimes they'll have a direct underwriting pre-approval, which is even better, which means that the lender pretty much looked at all of their finances and they're good to go. But after they get accepted, they're going to have to go through and submit even more paperwork to the lender in order to get their approval. However, note that some conditions can remain before they can before they'll get like their full removal, but that doesn't mean that you don't remove the loan contingency, because as long as you have conditional loan approval and the lender is giving the thumbs up, like, you should be good to remove it. So, some clients may complain like, hey, the lender asked me for like these other 10 documents and now they're asking me again for these 10 documents. So they may complain to you. You're just going to tell them, like, well, tough luck, you're buying a home. You have to submit this paperwork. Like, you don't have an option unless you just don't want this house. Of course they should have thought about that a long time ago, but I've had people complain like, I submitted all this paperwork to the lender and now they're asking me for this and now we're asking me for that. Well, I'm sorry, you're just going to have to submit it to them. And us as agents don't submit it, they do. And then remind them not to finance anything new. Found out one time, a good lender of ours told us that our client had bought a car before closing. don't recommend buying anything like that. Don't finance anything new. Don't open up any lines of credit. Make sure you're telling your buyer this. I mean, their lender should be telling them this, but just in case nobody told them, they could potentially lose their earnest money if they have all contingencies removed and if it's to their fault. If they, like, even if they didn't know that they shouldn't open it up, it's still their fault. Like, they still shouldn't have done that. So like if they go and finance a car 2 days before closing and then that screws everything up and they don't end up closing on it, guess whose fault it is? The buyer's fault. The buyer shouldn't have done that. But you should be telling them that. I mean, it's not your fault if they do that, but you should be telling them that, and they should not be opening up new lines of credit, no new cars, don't go finance furniture, don't do any of that, don't pass go, don't collect $200 because then you're not going to get a house. So you're not going to be able to close on your house. You're at risk of losing your earnest money deposit. If the seller really wants to keep it, they could, basically take you to mediation and try to keep your earnest money deposit because you decided that you wanted to go buy a new car or even like an old car, financing an old car. So new car just means new to you. So I would remind them that in the beginning and maybe remind them of that once their loan contingency is removed. Like, hey, don't go opening up new lines of credit without talking to your lender first. So if you talk to the lender and he's like, yeah, you can buy a new car, it's not really going to affect anything, then they can go buy it. But and then now you're at the point where all contingencies have been removed, everything is good to go. Now you can probably breathe a little bit easier because that means you got through inspection, you got through appraisal, you got through loan. So this is, you can breathe a little bit easier, but your job still isn't done yet because there's still some things that you need to get through. And sometimes this can, go and breeze right through and you're like, wait, I didn't really do much after contingencies were removed. And then some, it takes a little bit more, working through and getting through. So basically what you're going to do, you're going to make sure that everything is moving along, make sure that, you're talking to escrow, you're talking to the lender about making sure that, you're on track to close on time, monitoring all of those timelines and deadlines. So we talked about repairs earlier. So 5 days before closing is when repairs are supposed to be completed. So all repairs should be done. Everything that the seller agreed to repair has been completed at this point. All receipts and warranties, whatever invoices are provided to you so that way you can provide them to the client at this point. So making sure that all of that is done, because then you're going to have your final walkthrough. At your final walkthrough, this is where you're going to print out that list of repairs, walking through the home with your client. However, you do not verify these repairs with your client. Your client is verifying these repairs. If they don't know how to verify the repairs, they need to bring back the home inspector and have the home inspector verify that the repairs were done and to their satisfaction. We do not do that as agents. We do not verify repairs because that's the reason why we didn't inspect it in the first place, is because that's out of our scope of practice. We're not looking and be like, okay, your air gap in your dishwasher is good. So we're just there to basically say, hey, here's this list, and they can walk around. You can walk with them, but you're not verifying that those things are done. They're verifying that the home is pretty much in the same condition as when they purchased it, making sure that there's not like big gashes in the wall and everything. And then in California, the seller's personal property is likely still in there because when you do the final walkthrough, it doesn't mean that the property is closed yet. So the seller can stay in place until closing. So, and then of course you do have the cases where the seller does stay in place after closing. So the seller personal property still be in there. You're just going to notate on the final walkthrough any items that have not been repaired, any items that are not the same. Is like, okay, I've had this wall. Okay, maybe there's an extra scratch. We're not doing that. We're not being petty, right? If there's like a big giant hole in the door, obviously we're going to do that. If there's a giant gash in the door or the wall or something like that, then yeah, you can put that as well. Just make sure that your buyer's not getting petty and like, I didn't notice this little dinky scratch on the floor. Oh, I'm sorry, people live here. So, and then any items that the property still has in place. So if there's like the seller's furniture in place or personal property that's still in place, then you can notate like seller's personal property still in place. Because technically, at closing, if the seller hasn't gotten all of their personal property out, that's deemed abandoned, and now it's the buyer's property, and the seller has no right to it. Of course, the buyer could still grant access, but sometimes, you know, escrows don't go great, and so sometimes the buyers are like, the seller, you know, they're not allowed to have this property. So just making sure that the seller gets all of that property out of there, and that just takes like talking to the listing agent and saying like, hey, we're about to close, make sure that the seller gets all of their personal property out there, and of course it's already notated on the final walkthrough. And then looking at the contract and making sure that the seller left all items that were agreed to. That extra P is not meant to be there. So I had an instance where so first of all, we're not supposed to do final walkthroughs for clients, but at this point I was with a different brokerage. If you're an agent on my team, you're not allowed to do a final walkthrough for your buyer. So just kind of ignore that part of the story. But I was helping military family that was moving here, but they weren't in the area yet. I ended up doing the final walkthrough for them and noticed that the seller had taken the chandelier from the dining room. So they took the chandelier and then they took the mirrors off the wall. So of course I notated that on the final walkthrough paperwork and let the agent know like, hey, they weren't supposed to take these things, and they did. Like they legit undid all the electrical and took the chandelier. Actually I think it might have been 2 different ones that they did that with. So I walk in and all I see is like dangling wiring from the ceiling. So, you know, this is the reason why we do final walkthroughs. You know, because we're in California, does that mean that the seller could possibly do that after the fact, after you've done the final walkthrough? Yeah. At that point, it would be like after the property is closed, that's between the buyer and the seller to mediate and to work out. At that point, we aren't mediating between the two because we're not lawyers at that point. Our fiduciary duty is done. But it is what it is sometimes, and those things can happen. I'm not sure why I think that process could be looked at to kind of, to change it, to make it a little bit better, but it is what it is for now. But you're looking at the contract and make sure that all items were left according to what was on there. So if they ask for like a refrigerator, washer, dryer, making sure that those are still in place, and making sure that anything else that was agreed to was left in the property. And if not, you're going to want to notate that, send it to the listing agent, and talk to them about those things that are on the final walkthrough that need to be addressed. And then in California, closing is a 3-day process. And depending on where you are, it could be a 2-day process. But if you're in the city of Los Angeles, you cannot fund and record on the same day. And here in California, the buyer and seller do not sit together and sign paperwork. The seller does it separately from the buyer. So when the buyer shows up to the office, or they can even have a notary sent out to them, it's just them. So you can be at the signing if you want to with your clients. I know I haven't always done that because, I'm usually at showings or on other appointments. So unfortunately, I'm not able to make it to all of my past closings. So, so the buyer usually signs the loan documents one day, the very next day, their loan funds. If it's a business day, if it's a holiday or a weekend, it will wait until the next business day. And then the deed is recorded the next day after that. So that's a full 3 days that you're looking at for closing. And that's why a few days beforehand, you're going to want to make sure that we're on track for those things. So that's why it's important that you're making sure that all of these things happen on time, because of the fact that you have to wait freaking 3 days for that to for your buyer's property to close. So if you're going to close on the 30th of the month, all of this is happening 3 days prior. So, you know, it doesn't happen after the fact, that happens beforehand. But just to let you know, it is a 3-day process. So the lender and escrow are likely working on that, you know, 3 to 5 days before closing. So you just want to like be on the lender and on escrow, making sure that those things are happening on time. And then when the property records, that's when the buyer takes possession and they officially own the home, and they can basically go to the property after the property records. And then escrow lets you know when the property records, or if it's a title company that has worked with you before, they can also let you know, but usually it's escrow letting you know that it was recorded. And then you can contact your client, give them a big congratulations, and then meet them at the property to give them the keys. So yes, I only have one more slide. I know you guys are probably tired of hearing me talk. I'm tired of talking, but we're almost done. Any questions on that before I close it out? You can change possession, by the way. So if you wanted to do it at a certain time of day, you can also put that in there. If you're like, I don't want to wait to for it to record, you could do that, like, hey, 10 a.m. I want to close. But generally upon recording is whenever it closes, whenever the buyer takes possession. What was I going to say? Recording can happen at any time of the day, and you're not really going to know when it's going to record. So it could happen at 9 a.m. or it could happen at 5 p.m. So you just don't know. So final thoughts on it. Communication is key during the transaction. Make sure that you're touching base with your buyer. Just keep them in the loop, because one of the major things that people talk about whenever they're you know, saying how their experience went with their realtor is that their realtor didn't really keep them up to date. They had no communication from them. So, you know, letting them know when to expect to hear from you and when things are happening. So just making sure, like, hey, you know, HOA docs were due today. However, you know, escrow let me know that they're going to need a few more days, yada, yada. So just keep your client up to date. Talking to the lender, escrow officer, listing agent throughout the entire time. So you're making sure that you're not going days upon days without any communication and not knowing what's going on, and keeping a log of all communication. The best practice and the thing that I was doing is keeping an email communication during the transaction. So if you had a phone call with your buyer, you're writing an email to them talking about what you talked about on the phone. You can just say, you know, just for your review, this is what we talked about on the phone, that's going to happen, blah, blah, blah. Just recapping your conversation. And then SkySlope is just a transaction management system, and that's what EXP has, for those of you who don't know that. And that's where all of the paperwork is uploaded, and they'll give you a transaction email that you can CC on each email to keep a log, because EXP requires that you keep a log for legal purposes, and you're supposed to anyways, and I highly recommend it. It'll keep you out of, you know, well, not really keep you out of jail, or not jail. It'll keep you out of jail. It won't keep you out of court necessarily, but you will want to have that log of communication should you ever have to go to court. Of course, you hope that never happens. But if, you know, it can happen. So if it happens, wouldn't it be great to like have that whole, like, okay, on Thursday, this, you know, I sent this email to so-and-so, they acknowledged that, blah, blah, blah. Like having an email log of things is going to protect you. So I highly recommend having that, especially with the client, but also do it with the listing agent as well. And I pretty much try to keep it email during the entire transaction, though some of the, you know, some things need to be talked about on the phone, and some things come across better, but then, you know, just end up sending an email at the end of it and just recapping your entire conversation. And so that's best practices for while you're in escrow, because you don't want something to turn out, if something ends up turning out badly, especially you want to have a log of things, but just in general, have a log of communication during the transaction. So, but anyway, sorry guys, I know this was super long, but there was a lot of things to cover. But that's the end of it. Just, who has questions on everything that or who has questions at all?
How does this process look with a transaction coordinator?
I would definitely recommend a transaction coordinator, because they're going to basically make sure that all of that paperwork is done, it's accurate, it has all the signatures that it needs, and they'll upload everything to SkySlope for you. And then actually EXP they just what was it? They have a whole team of transaction coordinators now. So, but yeah, they pretty much do all of your paperwork for you, with the exception of like if you need a certain addendum or something like that that has specific language in it, then you may want to do that yourself. But they're doing pretty much all of the paperwork. Like I do my own repair requests. I don't have my TC do that. So like any addendums that aren't simple, and then any repair requests I'll do myself. But other than that, like they're making sure like, hey, we need these disclosures, and then they're sending out the disclosures for signature. They're uploading those disclosures. So I would definitely recommend getting a TC, because you're going to save like a couple hours, if not more than that, like on paperwork. So it's definitely worth it, especially when you're first starting out. All right, who else? You're all probably tired now. Alexis, are you good?
I am.
You are? Okay. Drew, are you good?
All good here.
Awesome. Nick? It's probably all, I mean, not just Nick, but I'm sure there's other people, it's like all brand new for them. So
Yeah, this is good. This is really good. I was unfortunately I had to take it in my car, so
yeah,
probably not the best note taking
it's okay.
sitting
It's
here, but
recorded,
this
so.
is really good.
Yeah, it's recording too, so if you
a
ever
lot.
wanted to go back through it, you could.
Awesome. Well, yeah, thanks for doing this. This is great.
No problem.
Yeah, thanks, Tasha.
You're welcome. Ryan, Sam, you guys good?
Yep. Good. No questions.
Awesome. And then everybody else? I was trying to point out my team. I don't mean to exclude the rest of you. Caleb,
What's up,
all good?
Irvin? Good to see you again.
Who was that? I didn't.
Hey, man.
Oh, Irvin. Charles, you all good? All right. Andy?
Great, very informative. I think you really went into great detail on how the process works. So that was great that you had this meeting and you invited us.
Awesome. Yeah, I probably could have talked for another 2 hours, but then my voice might be gone at then, and you guys would probably be starving and then hate me and then be tired or fall asleep or something. So there's so much to cover when you go through, from start to finish for escrow. So but anyways, thank you guys so much for being on. I'll let you guys go and go get dinner or whatever you're gonna do. Anybody have any final questions before I go? Ryan Logan, you're full of questions always. All righty. Well, I appreciate you guys being on. Hope this was helpful. Let me know if you guys want the slides. I'd be happy to share those with you.
Thank you very much, Tasha. This has been an informative meeting.
I didn't know you were on, Irvin. When did you
I'm
come
always
on?
around 10 minutes, I think, from the
Oh,
meeting.
okay. Oh, okay.
Thanks,
You're not
Tasha.
short at all. You're welcome, Nick. Have a
Bye,
safe day.
Nick. Bye, everyone.
See you, Irvin. Yeah, stay safe.
Stay safe, you
Thanks,
too, guys.
Tasha. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.